And you. All right. Now, with Mercy here at my side, there we go. Cat wouldn't be a traditional Maddie stream without cat butt.
Yep, cat butt is needed.
Okay, I want to discuss mechanics. All right. Now, I've tried to present what I've interpreted out of this game. All
Okay.
right.
Yep.
Now, here is ultimately where my problems lie. Right. Again, for those of you who just joined us, my biggest complaint with this game comes down to its mechanics and the way the book was laid out. And I'll tell you the quick story. We
Okay.
were using House of a Thousand Corpses as an example of this. Now, if you've seen the movie, you know in House of a Thousand Corpses we are introduced to the character of Captain Spaulding first, who is, well, for lack of a better term, a sociopathic clown who has absolutely no qualms about shooting, maiming, or any of the other things. We're introduced to a horror character first, who would normally be an antagonist, but because we are viewing him first, we view him as the protagonist. Now, the reason I use this as a point of a book's layout is because the very first thing we see in this book is this artwork presented by J-Man. We are presented with this world, and we're presented with this little summation, right? Enough to kind of get whet the appetite, and then immediately we are hit with mechanics, a very dry read mechanic. When our appetite has been whetted for wanting to know more, like what is this game about and all this, we're all of a sudden introduced to mechanics and with no context. So the impression I initially got out of this was it was taking a lot more from Dungeons and Dragons, because look at how many pages are actually dedicated to fighting. Okay, you have a lot of options for that. We were talking about the critical system, and the reason I ended up initially pulling that was to end up saying, hey, I'm going to compare this to something that uses a somewhat simple or a similar critical system. Obviously, I'm a vampire player, so I had to pull Vampire 5th Edition, okay, which uses blood dice in very similar manners. Now, here's where the catch lies. We now understand what kind of a horror game we are trying to portray in this, or at least my interpretation thereof. Now the question here is do the mechanics back this up, or do the mechanics get in the way? Right? So there is a mechanic here. I don't have the book open right in front of me right now, Maddie, but maybe you remember this. Do you remember when they were presenting the idea that you first have to make a roll for investigating to find something, and then you have to take a roll to interpret? Okay.
Yeah.
This,
Let me see.
yeah, it's okay. This is an example of, does this serve the narrative, or are we putting information behind what is effectively a dice wall? Right? The reason I end up bringing this up is because part of it is discovering and piecing together all these things bringing about, and it involves a kind of mystery. Now, that works really well with conspiracy, but does this information require two dice rolls in order to get? Because here's the thing, weight of dice is actually working against you in this regard, because we have to roll it not once but twice. So we have 2 points of failure to get one piece of information, right? Now, that information, if it's critical to the understanding of what's going on here, once that has failed, okay, now we got to go on this alternative path and what have you. But is that really helping horror? And that's what we're going to approach this as, is when we look at the mechanics, is this helping with horror? Right? Is this helping with this idea of conspiracy and dealing with drugs and dealing with all of the stuff that this very straightforward module presents to us, right? And this is where I feel the weakest part of it is, because it is taking the D6 system. It's an open system, if I understand, Maddie. I do apologize. I'm not as familiar with this system
Yes.
mechanically, but if I understand. Okay, so it is something open. A lot of other smaller games use this. So this is a fantastic jumping off point to see, okay, are we making checks? Well, we're trying to roll for target numbers. We're trying to roll over 10, we're trying to roll over 15, we're trying to roll over 20, we're trying to roll over 25, whatever it might be. Okay? So we understand the check can fail. Now we have this critical. Okay, now this critical is what I want to focus on. And the reason I'm focusing in on it is because your critical failures add a complication to the story, right? Your critical successes can, in some cases, actually lead to something going. But ultimately, it's that critical failure I want to focus on, because that's the thing under the water, right? It's always there, and it's waiting for you to slip up. It's waiting for that moment to suddenly just pop out and realize, oh crap, I just rolled a 1 on my critical, and because I rolled a 1, not only is my target number lower, but I actually have something that might pop out and cause this whole situation to go blank up. Right? So when we look at this, okay, that helps. That helps huge in giving us this thing that we need to be wary of, that if we fail a roll, this critical can come back and bite us. I like that. I like that a lot. But mechanically, does anything here, outside of that one thing, seem to tie into anything we are trying to end up exploring in this game right now, as I have interpreted thus far? Maddie, you've been kind enough to be silent and allow me to orchestrate an entire plethora of thoughts and ideas. But what do you think? Does what you've read tie into what we've discussed? Can you see it?
I don't see it in a building horror. I do see it as that jump scare, as that surprise. It's something that would be a complication. I don't think those intrinsically build into horror. Because it's not from a mechanical basis, and this is always tough, because we're discussing how do you bridge a crunch with fluff, and how do you present a system that a mundane list reading GM can run as compared to a GM with flourish and flair and understanding. So I don't know if the system itself does build into the horror or the suspense aspects. Although Ivalon is bringing up some interesting points if you've been reading it and you want to address them.
I have. Evelon is, for those of you who don't know Evelon is very much, I would argue, a mechanics philosopher. He kind of takes a lot of different RPGs and just kind of studies them, and he's not afraid to run in the same month Call of Cthulhu and then run Made RPG, which I still want to get involved in a Made RPG with him. But here's the question, right? And I have to agree that the D6 system might not be in service to this game. I could be wrong. I would be absolutely giddy if somebody could prove me wrong on this. And that would be fantastic, because I want this D6 system to come into service with it. But mechanically, right, there is nothing over your head, right? It's entirely situational, and this is where I think the Dungeons and Dragons analysis is a lot more accurate than what's being said, because it's a storytelling game, but the approach to the mechanics are more Dungeons and Dragons. There is nothing mechanically that is directly reinforcing the narrative. So they almost feel like two separate things. And that's one thing I really don't like, because once that divide has happened, this is where you start getting this clear divide of how do we approach. And the best example I can think of this is Shadowrun. Shadowrun is notorious for requiring characters who are a little bit beyond what you would typically expect in regular RPGs. It's a very fantastic world, built with megacorps and all this kind of stuff. But mechanically, it's kind of just a check and fail system. That's all it is. You could remove all the mechanics out of Shadowrun, replace them with a storytelling system proper, or you can put it with GURPS, or you can put it with roll or any kind of D20 system. The flavor of the game would not change one step. Does that make sense to you so far, Maddie?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay. Now, we looked at the spirit of the game, right? And what is the spirit of this game, right? The spirit of the game thus far, it has been the idea of real horror, but given a little bit of a barrier by putting us with these fantastical, the mundane fantastic, right? That's our barrier to kind of like soften the edge a little bit, which isn't bad, right? Especially, but you're going to need to get into some real world horror to realize or to kind of bridge the gap. None of the mechanics do this, right? The mechanics are abilities, but they're not inherently a sword of Damocles. They're not something that is making you think in terms of the narrative that this can go wrong. And the reason I bring this up is, again, I come from a vampire background. Now, every World of Darkness game does something very interesting with this, is that ultimately the system reinforces a particular set of behavior. Now, if I were to offer a critique or an idea, let's just say, is tie your race to a particular type of horror. So a simple example I would end up saying is that maybe how Dungeons and Dragons uses feats, or actually New World of Darkness does this a lot better. Chronicles of Darkness has this idea that you end up getting faults, so you can actually get this penalty called addiction, right? You're going to have to deal with it. Well, guess what? This particular race is really, really easily addicted. They're either stone sober through their entire life, or they're junkies dying in the corner of the street. The middle ground in it is so narrow, razor blades cut themselves on it, right? So now we have a mechanic backing up a narrative.
What about I understand that, and I think that makes sense. Aside from, like, if we gutted the dice system, because that's any, as you said, almost any game that requires rolls. I mean, you mentioned Dread too, or and that's a
Dread.
That's very interesting, and that you could play this game with that too.
I would love to end up playing this type of game with the Dread system.
Ooh.
I would love to, like, Dread is a perfect example of mechanics that are elegant, right? It is not complicated to play Dread. You can give me 5 people, a room, and maybe 20 minutes, and we will be able to play Dread, right? because the whole thing builds on itself, right? We all understand what's at risk because that tower is just teetering and tottering. Yes, all you 90s people, shout out if you caught that. So, because we have this really basic, like very simple mechanic, but because it is so simple we all get it, but it still gives us that anxiety that that tower might fall. I mean, everybody gets anxious when the Jenga tower falls, far less when you end up realizing that it's life or death Jenga. And that's effectively what Dread is, life or death Jenga. Um, that's fantastic. That is mechanics backing up the theme, the concept, the thing you're
Mm-hmm,
trying to
mm-hmm.
invoke. The system as it stands right now, I do not feel does. And
Is
that's a huge thing.
is there a way, if replacing the dice system, because I was never privy to any of the planning for this. I mean, all I do is I'd pop in, I'd watch J-Man make art for this, and and maybe talk about this or that, and I think he talked about using a D6 system, but I mean, there's Tristat, there's a lot of D6 systems that exist. I wasn't sure what was necessarily going on with that. Um, is there a way that let's say that he did decide to stick with D6 and he did have some flexibility with this license, that perhaps it wasn't just the cut and dry, here's how attacks work, here's how crits work. I think in the opening we talked maybe to help build suspense, um, depending on something like, I don't know, let's say if you fail a roll, you can choose to succeed, but instead you have to increase the number of your wild dice in your pool by one or two. Um, and so
See that
you're buying something now, but you realize it's gonna strike back, like that karma, that whatever you want to call it. That it's building suspense, or is that still
that
artificial?
is perfect. That is perfect because here's the thing, right? The game is designed to kind of start with a bang, right? The call to action, right? It drags you in, and now you're involved in things. And now you have to start building up, right? And you need that something that is making life just a little bit more edgy, a little bit more difficult. And if you're capable to actually have a mechanic that kind of forces that tension, that makes you a little bit hesitant, just that, not a lot, just a little bit hesitant to roll that die, not for fear of failure, but either in what that failure represents or realizing that this, because of these rolls systematically, you can only flip a coin so many times before tails shows up, right? Actually, I just realized that I'm just going to double check here on the chat, but yeah, there's some discussion on. Oh, apparently I'm being called. Forgive me, I came in late, Mr. McComb. What is your publishing background? That's a good question. Um, I don't. I don't have a publishing background. I have a background primarily suited in World of Darkness. So the reason Maddie ended up bringing me on here is because my gaming experience is drastically different from Maddie's. Maddie has delved into World of Darkness, but he mains Dungeons and Dragons. He's more familiar with Dungeons and Dragons Pathfinder, and he has a sickening love of Fourth Edition. Ugh. But myself, I come from a storyteller's background. I have a lot of stuff when it comes down to, okay, here's the kind of game's going. Now, when it comes down to Vampire the Masquerade, Mage the Awakening, we are talking about werewolf, we are talking about demon, we're talking about these kind of things. I have a very different expectation. Now, one of the things that White Wolf as a publishing, and I'm just using this as a comparison of my experience to Maddie's experience, is that with when it comes down to White Wolf, one of the big things that is oftentimes the first thing criticized by any White Wolf fan is how good does the mechanics back up what the fluff is trying to tell us? Does the crunch meet the fluff anywhere in here? Because some that do are phenomenal. The ones that don't cut it, and they fall by the wayside. There's more than a few games that have. But when we're here looking at a game, I've looked at a few books, and I gotta end up looking at this as a reader. And this is one of the reasons why when we were going over this, right, I was discussing the idea that it has this wonderful setup. It has this imagery that just pulls you in. It has this small write-up that kind of makes you go, oh, what kind of game did I just pick up? But then it all of a sudden hits you with the crunch that doesn't feel, as a reader, like you almost feel like, I want to skip this part. Let me get back to the good stuff. And if you're kind of experiencing that, it's not what you want, especially if you're wanting to impress people. It's dissociative is the best way I can put it. It's you were expecting one thing and we're suddenly given another and you're not sure. And probably the best example, yeah, Onyx, you know this to be true. You know this to be true. But the best example was what Flora has been saying this whole time, because Flora came in here after viewing the book, right, seen the pages, read just a little bit in, hit mechanics, and from this point on, they had a bias in their head on what they were getting into. And Maddie, you and me ended up going for probably an hour before we started end up coming into, like, here's where the horror in this game is.
Yes.
Right?
And
we had to do some digging.
And that's why I think it is important to try and find the way to back up the horror, because the post-human condition system is wanting to explore and encourage this personal horror. And so, you know, we can roll D6s all day long, and that's fine. It's a means to an end. But as you're talking about the crunch to the fluff, you know, there's the suggestion of, you know, maybe you cash in a little bit of your karma or your fortune by scaling up your wild dice, or you know, something else that came to mind while you were talking is no, shoot, hang on, let me see if I put this elegantly. Because we part of this is to establish what is normal, and we need to figure out as monsters what is abnormal. A possible way to help reflect that could instead, or in addition to, be when an event occurs that is creating a stressful situation, or what the DM is hoping is going to create a stressful situation. The DM can maybe have a mechanic where, I keep saying DM, Dungeon Master, the GM can perhaps call for an increase. All your dice pools, now everyone replace 2 dice with wild dice, 3 dice with wild dice. And that could be a way to apply some pressure, because, and as we talked about in that first segment, you know, rolling your dice is like drawing your weapon. You better be willing to use it and or accept the consequences of its use, you know, of taking a life or, you know, yourself getting in jeopardy. And so to create tension and to try and back up the horror that the GM is hoping to present, there could be some kind of a call where any dice rolls are going to be that much more difficult. Coffee saying risky dice rolling is a good way to add tension. Yeah, and so
I don't ever want to see Luke roll dice ever.
To see Luke roll dice, I'm not
risky.
Oh right, risky Luke. Yeah. Derp. So I don't know. Could you think that could be a way to have? Because I don't want to overcomplicate this. I like the simplicity and the flexibility of this D6 system, but how can we flavor it to back up everything that I think everyone in this chat agrees? Like, we love this. We want to explore this. This is different than H.P. Lovecraft Eldritch horror. This isn't just skulls and blood as horror, quote unquote. This is
No.
deep personal stuff. So how can we tweak this system without gutting it in order to try and convey that that tension, that suspense that builds to dread and horror? Not the dread Jenga, but there's that too.
Yeah, but I use dread as an example because what we're looking for here is an elegant solution, right? Because one of the things I do not want for this system is for it to get bogged down. I like the idea that there's only 7 pages of rules. You can read through these and you're done, right? If you and literally most of these you will run into maybe twice a session, maybe. I like that. I like the fact that everything is simplified. The thing I don't like about it is somehow we need to end up looking at, okay, what can we do with this regard, right? So for instance, right, here's a simple example of something that can work, or what does work, okay? If we take a look at an attack, right, I'm just going to read it out loud while you were showing the character sheet because some of the chat want to see it. Make your attack roll, which is a physical stat plus skill. This is already determined on your character sheet in Godkillers, and is also discussed in the explanation of stats and skills section later in case the PCs improvise. If you succeed on attack, that is, if you meet or beat the defense, you have hit the opponent. Subtract their defense from your attack, add the weapon damage if you have it, one, and subtract the armor roll. A little bit convoluted, but okay, like there's an example, we can follow it. If the result is 0 or less, you still hit, and they have a minus 1d to all pools until the next turn. So if we take a look here, right, we got a certain amount of damage we can take, right? And once we've taken 15 points of damage, we got this -3 until healed. So this is kind of that whole snowballing effect that starts to happen. This is a good way to create tension because if you've ever played a game with this kind of scaling, the second that you've been wounded enough that it's starting to affect your dice pool, things are going to snowball against you very quickly, right? And this is one of those things where panic starts to set in as soon as you have that -1 to your dice. It just naturally does. Because guess what? Now you're dealing with something that is starting to get out of control, and 3 turns later, suddenly now, nothing you do can work. So you need to come up with a way to come back at it. I like those kinds of mechanics, right? So I'm looking at this and I'm trying to think what can happen or what has happened through the whole thing. The first thing that comes to mind would probably be ailments, okay? So the ailments would end up coming either as a penalty that you've inducted on yourself, and you can make this actually surprisingly simple. Actually, I think I have an elegant solution. I am not sure because I'd have to play test it. But say if you hit a critical, you go through the regular rounds, but because you also critical failed, there's one thing. For the rest of whatever would be a scene or the rest of let's say the day, we'll use D&D terms in this regard, right? Every time you critical fail, the critical fail increases by 1. So what happens here is you need to roll a 1 on a D6. But now you have to roll a 2. So if there's a 2 on there and you fail, you critical fail. Now there's a 3. So now it went from 1 to 1 and 2 to 1 and 2 and 3. So now you have a 50-50 chance of critical failing if you never end up or if you can't quite make it. This is building up that things are getting worse and worse for you.
Is that a suggestion? And as you said, playtesting, making a proposition is one thing, playtesting is another. But
Yeah.
is that to replace the negatives to dice pools, where simply the dice pools remain the same, but the chances to fail, because that's what we discussed, is actually a very common threat. The chance
Yeah.
to fail increases as you're getting into a panic, or as the situation might call for.
I
Um,
think I think the reduction in health makes sense in a combat scenario. I am talking about everything else, right?
oh, so if I'm running this for you and I describe a murder scene,
Yeah.
then to ramp up the pressure that you are under some kind of mental or emotional distress, you might be more prone to make mistakes.
So if I critical fail in that scene, that is sticking with me. And so now my critical fail is no longer one, it's one or two. I don't think I would go past three on it because you still want that hope, but you want it lurking under the surface, right? And I think with the ability to kind of check if it's one, two, or three is not complicating the system at all. It is simply a checkbox. Do you have one? Do you have one, two, or three? This is indicative of the kind of stress. So you might just flat out like you can't look at this. You can't look at this body. So that's your critical fail, right? And
Gotcha.
that body is now haunting you. Maybe you are starting to get suspicious, so you start looking at people a little bit weird. So your social interactions might critical fail, right? There's so many ways you can do it, but you're not doing it on HP. But it's a simple solution. I think that's what I'm primarily looking for is a simple solution to it. And I think that is one way that could be explored.
Yeah, with a game like this that I think is very heavily focused on storytelling, I would feel like we'd be doing a disservice to try and convolute it with more mechanics or a ton of circumstantial mechanics or minutia, where everything has a subtlety, one or two subtle options to it, because we do want people to play this. We do want, so we want people to get involved. We want people to explore this personal horror. We want them to invest in this, in this small operation and help them grow and be bigger. And so, as we're giving advice, while it is straightforward, and I think we've dragged J-Man a little bit over the coals here, in all fairness to him, and ultimate respect to him. I also want to make sure that we are stressing that we want to make improvements. If we see that there's a deficiency or something that could be improved, let's not just complain about it, but step up and fix it in this demo. And for anyone who has joined us, this is a demo of a role-playing system. It has pre-gen characters. It is a beginning story.
Yep.
So this isn't a 300-page final hardbound, $60 hardcover book. And so if we've ever sounded harsh about this isn't because we wouldn't suggest it. In fact, for all the things that we've brought up, I think you should invest in this if you want to explore horror and you want to explore nuance.
I think the biggest hurdle for anybody coming to it, and I keep bringing them up, and it's just because they're active in the chat. Flora keeps I'm gonna read what was said, and I think this is said beautifully to illustrate the difference between expectation and presentation, right? Imagine what it would be like to live in this world full of monsters, and what if there are certain areas, cities where monsters would not exist and should be safe areas, and then introduce monsters to the city. The fear of it begins of those inhabitants of that city. So you can do that. I would imagine you can do that. Though then again, human beings are, at least from what I read, and Maddie, correct me if I'm wrong if you got a different impression here, but I got an impression that regular good old human folk are very rare. They are near mythical. They are your unicorn.
At,
Right?
at least around these parts, because everyone here, to be normal, you have been affected by this, I don't know, this change, this radiation, this influence of these god embryos. And so if you looked what we as human beings, as players, consider normal, you would not be normal. In fact, you would probably get stared at by the locals.
Yeah, but here's the thing, right? The core of this is that ultimately this is fairly mundane life, right? And a lot of the technology, right? Like a simple example, I looked at that pickup truck, and the first thing that came to mind was, I wonder what it runs on. And the reason being is that I know chaos is a thing. I would expect technology to take advantage of the fact that chaos is a resource. Chaos is the magic system in this. I would expect that there are certain integrations, but we have not evolved like fast. We have suddenly become, right? So old technologies still remain. But the disconnect I wanted to bring up with Flora here is that they're very focused on, this monster, right? But we're using
Mm-hmm.
the term I feel when they say monster is the idea of this horrible thing that's coming for you, right?
The skin, it has 3 eyes and 2 mouths, and that makes it
Yeah,
the monster.
yeah, but that's not a monster. Like the Medusa in this is not a monster. It's an addict. But really, it's a girl who's just looking to have a good time and have a good buzz going on in a party. That's ultimately is, right? So what if I date monster girls, right? That yeah, I'm a monster too. So I we can't look at each other as monsters. We are just this particular offshoot of human beings, right? Now, because we end up having this kind of relationship with them, and I, I guess the best way I can put it is that when you're presenting this, you have to, at the core, present this as this is window dressing. Because underneath all those snakes and those orange eyes and that lovely green skin, just a high school girl. That's what
Yeah,
it is,
exactly.
right? Um, and it's not, I'll talk about her like she's real. She is not in any way malicious in that regard. She is not the thing that is lurking underneath the steps and, oh, they found out about me, so I'm going to have to end up taking them out. And, well, can't leave any witnesses, so we're going to need to end up exiting with the children. I might raise one as my own because I might need a defense of some sort. No, that worried about grades and looking pretty for the prom. That's her biggest concern. She happens to be over out here on a houseboat. How awesome is that? Hey, somebody brought God tears. It's puff puff pass, right? Um, that's what she is.
Yeah, and
Right?
in its own sense, as we've been talking about this opening to the story that's in this module is a very classic. This is classic to slasher films. This is the teens are at a party. They're doing bad things. They're committing sin by drinking adult beverages or partaking in drugs or having the sex, and of course that means that they deserve murder by monsters who are going to terrorize them, and that's what's happening to them because they are teens. They're normal.
Yeah. And here's another thing, Maddie. I can flip that on you. Yes, that is. You decide to end up putting this in terms of slasher films. You're putting this in my camp. I'm going to throw this back in your camp.
Sure,
So
sure.
You know what this situation is ultimately?
The
This is the D&D Tavern on the water.
the party? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bunch of adventurers, right? They're ousted from their own lands. They gather together for inebriation, and they're also looking to make
call
gold.
To action happens.
And in the call to action, so goblins invade the town, and
It's at this point the Frog E-Myth decides to kick over the Tavern.
Yeah.
That's what this is, right? The context, or the root of the context, does not change, regardless of which system we're kind of putting this towards. So when we look at this again, do the mechanics help in this regard? I don't believe so, not in their current incarnation. What I do like is the fact that what this ultimately is traditional horror modernized, and then giving the window dressing that you would give something like Shadowrun.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right? That's the way I view this, right? Yes, gods are a thing. Yes, they are influencing culture. Your culture does come around your god. Your religion does come around your god. And your god is something you don't have to believe they exist. You see it, right? There is hard evidence right there. And while technically they're not a god, they're something that felt they have demons, they have all this other kind of stuff, and this is due to the interpretation of the faith and those who are pushing the faith and those who proselytize. Your worldview is a little weird, but it makes all the sense in the world because we have a real world allegory to this. There I would not go ahead.
Perhaps then we can meet this halfway, because I think we found perhaps what this as a demo might be missing is that link or that bridge or the way to maybe ham-fistedly, but to tell people what we've explored and what we've explored as professional storytellers. If you don't mind us, if you don't mind me yoking us with those titles.
I haven't been a professional in my entire life, and I have no intention of starting now.
Yeah, excuse me, sir, please. Well, so while we can suggest things like adjusting some dice pools, perhaps too, and I think we can agree in chat in between us, Derek, that the presentation, the order in which the story and the system is revealed can change, and maybe there can be some little tweaks to the paragraphs of the story or the text or otherwise to say something along the lines of yeah, so for notable partiers, it says Glazu, and she has a real name, but she goes by Glazu because, look, you're a kid and you have an alternate identity, right? Glazu is a Gorgon teenager who is high on God's tears. Glazu doesn't sound loopy, but more like your own personal prophet, speaking wisdom straight to your heart. She's a believer in the Lost One, someone whom Zep converted personally. And so this is one little paragraph, but if it was presented with one or two more sentences or a little bit differently, where you have someone who, don't even say that she's a Gorgon, or if you do, don't have her bring it up. Just say that she is a normal teenager, and present it in that fashion. And so if it's written that way in the mod, I think that could help to convey the spirit of the soul of the system that I think we've found, and I believe J-Man would agree with us that it is in this nuance. It is in the personal horror, not just the Eldritch stuff or the monsters.
The big thing I would say with that is you'd almost want to describe the situation much like you said, and then just describe maybe she kind of zones out and you kind of see her snakes looking out the same way she is. And what do you mean by snakes? She's a Gorgon. Literally just hand wave it. What isn't this important information? No, not particularly. This is not where your focus is. And because we, as the storyteller, as the DM, and more correctly for this system, the GM, because we will go through all three of those titles multiple times, more so tonight. because we've done that, we've normalized it. It is so normal. Like, I do not need to explain when this NPC comes in that they're wearing clothes.
Mm-hmm.
Because we presented their features, right? Um, you might say, yeah, you might notice her snakes are tied back tonight. Wait, what? Yeah, the more important thing is they're tied back, not the
Yeah.
fact that she got snakes.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I see. She walks in the room and she looks so different. Yeah, she's wearing her snakes back tonight. But so you built
Yep.
up and you had that little release. And I was having fun too. I imagined if I had, I don't know, some character art. I have like, I don't know, 5 female monster faces and 5 male faces. And if everything about the NPCs or the PCs was described as a normal human being, and then when you went to give that, but her snakes are tied back, you pull a random art piece out of a bag, because the characters are the characters. They are humans, or they are post-humans, if you want to call them as such. And so you're describing them as people. Oh, who just happened to reach in the bag, have her snakes on her head worn back. And now suddenly you've described the character, you've described their humanity, and then it's almost like the snakes don't even matter. Now they may, I don't know, if combat breaks out, maybe they do something or whatever, but maybe that could help add to the, maybe not the tension, but that could help add to the presentation. Yeah, to the normalcy. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I wanna address J-Man right now. Because J-Man, you are right. Some people will get it, some people won't. Here's the thing: just as me and Maddie criticizing this, and hopefully it's constructive criticism. I'd like to think we're both doing this, but maybe it's just me. What we're trying to do is make sure that there's a few people who are reaching out their hands right now. There are a few people who want to get it. There are a few people who are just trying to like grasp at it and go, okay, this is interesting. Okay, I am having this conversation, but they don't get it. They want to, right? And so I'm trying to end up figuring out like how do we present this in a way that helps them bridge the gap, right? So that there are fewer people who don't get it, not for a lack of trying, but just aren't quite there, right? I'm hoping that makes sense.
And as I said, J-Man, I agree. You know what? If you ever develop anything, you could develop a car, an automobile, and who doesn't drive or want to drive an automobile? You are going to make a car that not everyone wants to drive, wants to purchase, wants to lease, whatever. And so you are absolutely correct, Journeyman, because there are target audiences for what you're trying to do. And as I said in my comment there, while Derek was stating that, hopefully we're not sounding like we want to tear it down and make it, baby's first RP and it's super approachable and generic. If anything, we're talking about passion. We're talking passionately because this is a passionate system. This touches on personal successes and personal horrors, and I think that this is something that many people can get a lot out of. Now, it may go beyond the target audience you had in mind.
Yeah. The big thing I would say is just speaking in that regard is I like the personal aspect. I do. I want like out of this game. I am kind of curious on what kind of races you can explore because I'm not gonna lie. The fact that they just introduced a Gorgon means I want to play one. That is one of those PC races that Dungeons and Dragons has never let me play. Okay, I want to explore that, and I want to explore that in modern times. I want to explore that in a situation where we can do horror. I have the game for it right here, right? We have it right here. This dream of mine, this little bucket list character, has a place, and I've come to the realization that oh my god, like we can do some stuff here. That's fantastic. And the people who don't get it, the people who it's not for, Onyx Path, you're probably with me here. there's a lot of people who don't get why would you want to play in a modern setting. I thought the whole idea was to get out of your world, not why would you want to play in it, right?
Yeah,
Why would you
yeah.
want to play a vampire? Like, there's so much more awesome stuff out there, right? Um, but to the few people who get it, right, you got a follower for life, and that's
It means
why it
so
is.
much to them.
God, yeah, and this is one of the reasons why vampire dies off, and then something releases, and oh my God, we come out of the woodwork, right? All of us are just crawling out from the sewers and out of the attics, out of mother's basement. Hello, my dear. All of us, half of us are Nosferatu, and we know it. We don't want to acknowledge it, but we are. And we just come in, and it's like, oh my God, there's this huge resurgence, right? You would have, if I were to tell you, Maddie, if I were to tell you 3 years ago, okay, while Critical Role was still developing, that Geek and Sundry is running a Vampire 5th edition campaign, you would have looked at me like I was crazy. Be
Three
honest.
3 years ago?
3 years ago, if I were to tell you that they were going to run that kind of game going, right? You would have looked at me like I was crazy. Yeah, we already had Vampire 20th anniversary. Like, it's as good as it's going to get at this point.
Oh yeah, 20th anniversary is solid stuff. But yeah, I agree that it. I wouldn't. It's not flashy. It's not the big D&D. Vampires. I don't know. I almost want to say because of the nature of vampire, because it's not. I want to be careful in how I word this.
No, don't be careful. Treat it like you're on my stream. Just let it fly.
I think because of either the personal nature of vampire or the intimacy it can create. Again, not necessarily romantic, but people, those who play World of Darkness, I think, have gotten a reputation that it is, and it's so it turns out to be something that even if you're with friends, friends that you trust, you play Smash Brothers with or whatever, you go for walks in the park, you whatever. You don't bring up the fact that you play vampire, almost like you don't talk about your kinks. So vampire is my game. This is my character because it's so personal. And so you have friends that you could talk to about it, but you don't because you don't want them to know or they can't understand. And so it's always been something that people just sort of like, yeah, vampire exists. I mean, I play it, but,
Now, here's the thing. In that same vein, right? In that same vein is where I see this system. Okay? In that it is odd. It is odd. How do I describe this, right? It's World of Darkness meets Shadowrun with Call of Cthulhu removing the secrets, and now the veil is open. That is ultimately like how I would almost describe this, because we have gods, eldritch gods, literally, it's sitting right there in the river.
Yeah, they trust us to babysit their kids.
Yeah, like what? Right? Like, how, pardon the term, but how batshit is that? Right?
Yeah, I agree.
I love it. And you can play, you can play as a monster. You can play as a monster, but here's the thing. You're not monstrous. You're a human being. You just happen to be born with either tentacles, horns, weird color eyes, a second pair of eyelids, maybe. But who are you? You're not some flesh-eating monster. You're not this person who must turn people into stone. No, you're Susie who works at the bookstore. You're John who, he worked on the plumbing last week. He serves as an electrician. This is what you're involved with. And it's kind of awesome for that.
Yeah.
And you can use all of, like, either monster tropes, so you could quite easily play a slasher in this, right? You could play literally Friday the 13th with this if you wanted to. You could play this Eldritch Deep One Call of Cthulhu type game with this. You can play this political intrigue with this. This is flexible. So its biggest selling point in that regard is the sheer breadth of what you can do with this. And the problem it has is connecting the idea that these may be considered monstrous races through every other game that has ever come out,
Mm-hmm.
and now trying to present them as just people. And going, no, the horror in this game has nothing to do with the fact that you look like a fish person.
Yeah, Jedi put it interestingly. He's a plumber with 2 kids first, and the creature from the deep second.
Yeah, Jedi, you nailed it.
Yeah.
That's what I'm getting out of it.
Yeah, comes home, oh, honey, if only I could tell you how many leaks that I had to fix today. And so Journeyman was J-Man, you're lifting your skirt a little bit. We're seeing some ankle about what's going to be coming out here. Some Southern Gothic cyberpunk set in New Orleans.
Why not?
Yeah.
The big thing with this is that it can be so much. There are so much all over the place in this that you have a hard time cutting to the root of it, right? And because it's almost a bait and switch, I guess is the best way to describe it, because you hear, oh yeah, you play as fish people, you play as gorgons, you play as these ghoulish, half-rotting individuals, or at least that's what they look like. Reality is their bodies are fully functional. You play as these cat people, or maybe you've grown extra spider legs out of your back, and you have webbing that you shoot from, fill in the blank. But here's the thing. Ultimately, this is what these people are, and they're people. So you can do these weird things. Like, I love the idea of an entire group of literal spider people. I love the idea of Frog Dad. I love that. You can actually play around with these, and these are just people. So what kind of a world would that be? Well, one of the first things I would think of is that their buildings are not built like human buildings where we build them straight up. No. They're more akin to posts, and everything is hanging. Everything is designed. You're going vertical and horizontal the whole time. It's interlinked webbing. And you're a construction worker. What do? Well, I grab some of the concrete. I have to spin a web over here. We're gonna have to spin a foundation here, right? Like, what? Yeah, this is what they would do, right? So you can get into these really strange worlds and these really strange ideas that you can play on. Now you can start playing around with, introducing a god who starts to affect the webbing, right? The webbing, the more there is around it, the more people start to get visions. What's going on here, right? The god is using the webbing of the city as an influence. In fact, their very own way of life is the thing that is causing these people suffering, and through no fault of their own, right? But here's the mystery that you can build up. So there's a lot of potential playroom with this. I like. And then you remember that ultimately, and J-Man actually beat me to it, people are monsters.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you end up taking that, you have to end up coming to understand that what you're dealing with here is not Cthulhu, it's Jeffrey Dahmer.
Yep.
That's where this comes from, and I think that's one of the parts that gets muddled in this book in its presentation, right? Is not overtly obvious. Is that you kind of have to make a monster out of a person, then reskin him into a monster without anybody being aware that he is one.
I like what Jedi put as a good example. So you have Frogman and his human friend Jim arrive at Jill's house. They knock on the door, to which she opens and looks at them in disgust. Jim had cheese in his mustache. Disgusting. We truly know who the monster of the two is. And you know what? That's a personal attack. As a man who gets cheese in his mustache, I can relate to that character.
Well, see, Maddie, the problem is that you end up having this, like, gnarly, like, spindly kind of goatee going on. You don't have this fine, trim elegance that I've been sporting all night. We're going to need to
shave.
You're going to need to fix it, you know. The neck beard thing, you know, you're trying to be presentable. You're not you're not currently representing particular boards. I will not advertise on your channel for safety reasons. But you know where this is going.
Yeah. I'd love to grow this out into a nice full beard to just go like full D&D DM. But I don't know. I kind of like just keeping this here, and as a monster, my mutation is I just can't seem to grow hair like right here. So I bring the stash down.
I have that same problem, except it's up here.
Well, hey, you know what? I might be entering that race sometime here, so we'll see how that turns out.
Gaze into your future, Maddie.
The crystal ball. Ooh.
But yeah, I think there are certain things that if we're going to end up taking this system further, you kind of need to be a little bit more obvious with it, and then kind of just in that, here's an idea. I'm just going to put an idea in your head, and the more you dig into it, the worse it gets, right? And the best example I can give to you in that regard is Jaws. The movie Jaws. The movie Jaws had such an impact that some beaches ended up dropping attendance up to 70% in some areas. Because somebody put an idea in the people's head that sharks might be at the beach. And their people just kind of ran with it. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I'm sorry to let Ace Platinum down. My name is not Russell. But that is an interesting thought experiment.
No worries. However, since I'm a little bit over time, Maddie, is there any other questions or anything like that you want?
No, I was actually going to say I think we've discussed this. We've definitely we've raked it over the coals, and we haven't just complained, as you find a lot of on the internet. We've also offered suggestions. We've come back to take a second look, and I think we've reached a good understanding of the post-human condition, and in particular this demo of GODKILLERS. I'm happy with what we've discussed. I'm walking away having learned something, and I feel a better person for it, and hopefully there's a lot of others out there that do too.
Yeah. All right. So I'm gonna end up doing a quick little bit. All right. One, I love I love the concept. I honestly would love to see this expanded. If I get the opportunity to be involved or run this game with some Hail Mary free time, I just might get the opportunity to pick it up. I mean, hell of a good concept. I would end up saying go for it. Second of all, another thing, because there is, if you want to know more, a graphic novel set in the world of the post-human condition called The Burlap Daughter, also illustrated by J-Man.
Yep. Journeyman, take a bow.
Take a bow. All right. If you have the opportunity, yep. If you have the opportunity, ask him about it. Get a chance to end taking a look. It will be coming soon. All right. It is out there. There is a chance to end up taking a look, and I have seen some of the artwork for it. I am hyped. Okay. Yeah, we already got the one person who's already hyped. take a look. It's worth the time. Third, okay? When it comes down to this system, I want to end up seeing it go further because the concept itself, just on the surface, gives you such a it's almost like a permission to have a blank canvas to start making. Games like Dungeons and Dragons, stuff like Vampire the Masquerade, all this have presumptions, right? They're all presumptions. I presume the dragon's going to terrorize the town. I presume that the vampire is ultimately going to be stalking the nightclubs and all this kind of stuff. I presume these things. This game takes all of that and kind of guts it and say, what would you do? What would you do in this situation? It's everyday life, just a little weird. And I want you to kind of, if you'll pardon the pun, embrace the weird. Have some fun with it.
Yeah.
And there's no presumption with it. And I like that. I like that. I kind of hope this game never has a meta plot. Just because, for as fun as the lore is, I think the world building would actually be more interesting than any degree of history or lore you can make in it, because of the just what you can do with it.
Yeah.
So that is a hell of a thing that they end up producing here. But keep an eye out. There will be more coming in for the post-human condition. This was Godkiller, and we're hoping to end up tackling this. And hopefully, Maddie, if you would have me, I would love to end up doing some follow-up stuff with you when it does end up releasing character generation and all of that fun stuff. Because this alone, the art itself, done by J-Man, is the initial hook. In fact, I was there I believe I was there when I first saw that cover. I was not aware it was the cover when it was being crafted. And see some of this stuff, and I'm like, wow, I remember that actually being made. So it's kind of makes me giddy inside.
Yep, and when this is developed further and further, I think that we can come back together. We can grow with this, and we can explore it with character creation. We can explore it with other concepts and settings. See what might have been modified or tweaked, or as Journeyman says, it's going to go through some revisions. Because look, everything goes through revisions. We all do as human beings. I can tell you, we're always on the way as people, right? All right, so Ace Platinum, be well, and you know what? You came in, you gave it a chance. If it's not for you, it's not for you. So go in peace.
Take care of yourself, Ace.
Onyx Path. Hey, it was a pleasure to do this, and I love it because it was challenging, and it gave us. I'll say us. It certainly gave me something to think about.
Yep. Well, I will end up saying that I'm grateful to Matty for giving me an opportunity to kind of hijack his platform. I will give him permission in a few seconds to take it back and look after it for me. But thank you very much, Matty, for a chance to kind of delve into this with you. And
you're very welcome.
Kind of do another take. The other thing, I would like to thank everybody else who ended up coming to join us tonight to be able to do something that's a little bit different. Be able to look at other systems and try and figure out, okay, well, what are we bringing in from other systems, and where can we find these connections? Because me and Maddie came at this from two completely different angles, and we kind of came to two very different conclusions. Watch this VOD where I go, watch where he went on his first read through, and we got some interesting things to end up pulling up from that. And I think finally, I I think the only thing to say at this point is J-Man sucks.
Yes, J-Man, you do very much, and I will back that up with plenty of spam of your very own emote. Yep, there we go, everyone. If you got it, flaunt it. Nothing's keeping you from just using a plain old keyboard to type out J-Man sucks. So please go ahead and do so as our parting gift to our dear friend here for giving us beautiful and haunting artwork, as well as the story, the system, and everything to go with it, and more as this continues to expand and spread through RPGs and comics and so forth. So, all right, well, everyone, I know, Derek, you got to get going. Why don't we pass on the energy? Let's find someone to raid. Let's find someone here to give a little bit of cheer. I think I'm gonna put my feet up for the evening, so I'm not gonna be I'm not gonna be doing any party games or whatnot tonight because I'd love to catch up on some sleep.
Yeah, well, Maddie, if I start streaming, that ain't gonna happen.
Yeah.
Let's get going. Much love to you, J-Man, and to everybody else. If you have not ended up having the opportunity, do hit that follow button. If you've had a chance to end up getting into the sub to end up starting your avocado collection of guacamole or other spicier tidbits, feel free to end up doing so. And remember, more streaming every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday for D&D tips and on occasion other little tidbits. So
yeah, here and there.
Hit that follow button. I command thee.
Smash that button. Crit that button. All right, let's go raid iTyrant Games. They're doing a D&D session. iTyrant does a lot of D&D stuff. You know, you could watch and learn. He uses Battlegrounds frequently, and I'm sure if you have questions, he and the players can answer them. Really solid presenter. And let's go say hi. So let's go raid them, and thank you all so very much for being a part of something special. It's always a fun adventure to share some time with you all. And J-Man, thank you for giving your time, your experience, your money, everything to go into this and to allow us to go over it and to have an unvarnished first impression and critique of it. That is really awesome, and that speaks highly of you and the others that you created this with.